I think we're ready to get started, Carrie, if that works for you.
Certainly. And good afternoon. If I get my camera back on. Greetings and welcome to another fantastic NASCSA webinar. My name is Carrie Shannard-Kunders and I am the Executive Director of the South Dakota Board of Pharmacy and I co-chair NASCSA's Education Committee. I'll be hosting this afternoon's webinar along with NASCSA's Kathy Keogh. Hopefully you read the scrolling material while waiting for the webinar to start, which provides information regarding our sponsors. A NASCSA disclaimer, housekeeping items, and announcements. Today's webinar and all of our fantastic webinars throughout the year are only possible with the generous support of our sponsors. So thank you to our sponsors. And thank you for taking time out of your day to join us for today's webinar. Everything you wanted to know about electronic prescribing, but were afraid to ask. I think there was a 1970-something movie that had a similar title for those of you who are older. Many of us have questions about potential e-prescribing platform changes, and I hope we hear about some of that information. Please hold questions until the end, and we will try and get to all of your questions. We are thrilled to have two extremely qualified experts from Surescripts with us today. They are Ken Whittemore and Ben Jensen. Please allow me to introduce them. Ken is Vice President of Pharmacy and Regulatory Affairs for Surescripts, the nation's largest health information network. Pharmacies, payers, pharmacy benefit managers, physicians, hospitals, health information exchanges, and health technology firms really rely on Surescripts to more easily and securely share health information. Ken's responsibilities at Surescripts include monitoring and influencing state and federal laws and regulations regarding to the health information technology, acting as Surescripts liaison to national and state pharmacy associations and boards, and providing guidance to the development and implementation of Surescripts programs so that they are responsive to the needs of pharmacists and organizations in which they practice. Prior to joining Surescripts in 2001, Ken was Vice President of Management, Professional and State Affairs for the National Community Pharmacists Association, or NCPA, where he was responsible for handling the managed care regulatory and operational issues that confronted NCPA's independent pharmacy members. He was also NCPA's liaison to all state, regional, and national pharmacy groups. Earlier, Ken co-owned a successful independent pharmacy in Western Maryland. Ken is a graduate of the University of Maryland School of Pharmacy, is licensed to practice pharmacy in Maryland, and holds an MBA from the Mount St. Mary's University. Next, we have Ben Jensen. He is the Manager of Fraud and Crisis Management at Surescripts. Ben runs the teams at Surescripts to address potential fraud and critical events that can impact the network, including patient safety and security incidents. Ben also worked with customers as the subject matter expert for identity proofing and verifications. Ben joined Surescripts in 2018, previously working in the cybersecurity and competitive intelligence for companies including Intel Security, Symantec, McAfee, Veritas, and VMware. Please join us in welcoming Ken Whittemore and Ben Jensen. Ken, the floor is yours.
Thank you, ma'am. Let's go ahead and get this loaded. Okay, do we have the first slide there?
We do.
So Carrie already covered this. Thank you very much for that generous presentation of our qualifications. So today's agenda, I'm going to lead off and I'm going to tackle what I'm calling e-prescribing potpourri. When Kathy first asked if we could do this, she didn't give me a lot of direction, but I kind of got the sense of what might be helpful for us to present. And then I'm going to transition the presentation over to my colleague, Ben, who, as I say here, his primary job is keeping the evildoers at bay. And getting back to not 100% sure what you folks want to hear about, we want to make sure that we answer your questions. So we have certainly hope to address whatever questions that you might still have after the presentation. One thing I'm going to do right now, though, because this was kind of unscheduled, I did want to touch on the Change Healthcare cyber attack and outage. Ben will probably talk a lot about this, but I just thought, knowing who the audience is, I would take this opportunity to share a couple of data points, and then he can fill in what I haven't shared. We were not, as an organization, targeted by the bad actor in this particular cyber attack, and so our systems are not actually affected. However, there is a subset of pharmacies on our network, about 5 or 6% of the pharmacies on our network, who use Change Healthcare to get to us for e-prescribing purposes. And so that small percentage of pharmacies has been affected by this outage. And again, Ben will probably touch on that, but I just wanted to share at the beginning that, again, the cyber attack didn't involve us, but we are taking steps to do what we can to help mitigate the impact of that on those pharmacies. So I'm going to first talk about prescribing trends. As I think probably most of you are aware, electronic prescribing is the predominant way that prescribers get prescriptions to pharmacies these days. I'm going to apologize a little bit in that the data on the next couple of slides is a bit dated. We every year issue what we call our National Progress Report, and we're just on the cusp of getting ready to send out our National Progress Report for 2023. And I will make sure that Kathy gets a copy of that to share with everybody once we do publish that. I think that's in about 3 weeks or so. So some of the slides here are dated, but the trends continue, and I can kind of talk you through that. So if you look at electronic prescriptions, even going back to 2021, we had over 2 billion electronic prescriptions that were crossing our network annually, and about 260,000 electronic prescriptions for controlled substances were also traversing our network on an annual basis. That's probably, given this is a year and a half old, we're probably talking about a 15% increase in both of those. As you're probably aware, I think most of the folks on this call are aware that first there was electronic prescribing, but it was about 8 years between when electronic prescribing got kicked off and when the Drug Enforcement Administration published its interim final rule to allow EPCS. So the industry was starting behind in terms of electronic prescribing for controlled substances. But even taking that into consideration, you can see, again, about a year and a half ago, overall prescriptions, 94% were electronic, non-controlled was 97%, and controlled substance was 73%. And again, we're quite sure that those numbers are significantly higher given that a year and a half or so has elapsed. This particular slide is current, shifting just a little bit, I think, because there are a lot of state people involved and are listening in on this presentation. You are aware that 2/3 of the states do have electronic prescribing mandates that are in effect. And this map shares that with you. Just to quickly scroll down the key, the green states have an electronic prescription requirement that applies to all prescriptions, so non-controlled and controlled. The blue states are those who have chosen to require electronic prescribing for controlled substances, all schedules. And one that's noteworthy is the last state to have one of these mandates take effect was Illinois. Their requirement that all controlled substances be electronic took effect this past January 1st. And then there are, as you can see, about a handful of states that also have requirements that are primarily focused on opioids and were really designed to address the ongoing opioid crisis. So at this point, I'm going to transition to some of the additional types of transactions that are related to electronic prescribing that are now traversing our network. And the first one I'm going to talk about is Rxchange. This allows bidirectional communication from pharmacists back to prescribers. It basically allows pharmacies to, whereas they might previously had to pick up a phone and make inquiry, call the prescriber's office and make inquiries or clarifications and whatnot, Rxchange allows them to send messages electronically back with respect to particular prescriptions that they have issues with, and then in turn allows the prescribers to respond. So the basic scenario is the pharmacy receives the electronic prescription. During the dispensing process, they determine there's issue, could be prior authorization, out of stock, therapeutic alternative they might want to suggest, a variety of different reasons. They electronically then send a message back to the prescriber, and it is received in the electronic health record. And then the prescriber can take whatever actions that they deem are appropriate. So again, it allows for bidirectional communication and is really designed to further to better document these types of communications and get pharmacy staff off the telephone. The use case has been expanded for this particular transaction. Originally, it was just you could use it for suggesting generic substitutions or prior authorizations or therapeutic interchange, but those use cases have now been expanded, as you can see, to allow additional types of either clarifications or communications with regard to out of stock, and I already mentioned a couple of the others. So this particular transaction has been available on our network for several years. I will say that these ancillary transactions, it has taken the pharmacy and the EHR industry a while to appreciate their uses and to go ahead and code and implement them. And so, and I have a slide that will address this momentarily, but it's not as universally available and used as is e-prescribing. The next slide is CancelRx, and that does exactly what it says it does. That allows a prescriber to send a message to a pharmacy asking them to cancel a prescription. The two basic use cases that apply in this particular transaction are, number one, to discontinue an active prescription that a patient might be receiving. A physician might have decided that, for example, they want the patient to use a different antihypertensive medication, but they want to make sure that they don't continue to receive what they were previously prescribed. The physician's office can send a CancelRx for that purpose. The other use case is what I refer to as kind of the oops scenario, where a prescriber created an electronic prescription, transmitted it off, and for a variety of reasons might have decided, oh, wait a minute, that's not really what I wanted to happen. That really wasn't my intent. So they can send the cancel out. And this is, as you can see at the bottom of the slide, it's a transaction that flows from the EHR through Surescripts to the pharmacy system. And then there is a response that goes back from the pharmacy acknowledging receipt that we then transfer back to the electronic health record system. Oops. Sorry about that. So in terms of the adoption, and again, these are stats that are about a year old, but you can see that both respect to the cancel transaction and the Rxchange transaction, that there has been, particularly in the case of CancelRx, pretty significant uptake by both prescribers and pharmacies. And we have seen over the past couple of years an increased interest on the part of prescribers in having this particular kind of transaction made available. And in fact, I mentioned the state of Illinois before. They've passed a law in Illinois that actually calls for the adoption. They don't specifically name CancelRx, but they describe the capability of physicians being able to send cancel transactions to pharmacies. And so it is something that, again, we're hearing kind of organically from the prescriber community that this is something that they want to see available. And so it, again, is supported on our network, and we're doing our best to see that the pharmacies adopt it. And when you get our latest edition of the National Progress Report, you will see the extent to which that has been adopted. The last transaction I want to talk about is RX transfer. And again, these are actually named pretty well. You can tell what they're used for just from the name. The National Council for Prescription Drug Programs created this transaction quite a long while ago. Although it's been available on our network for several years, pharmacy uptake of this particular transaction that would allow pharmacies to electronically transfer a prescription from one pharmacy to another, as opposed to pharmacists picking up the phone and transferring it that way, the uptake hasn't been very significant at all. And there's some reasons for that. They're, for the most part, related to the nature of the RX transfer transaction as it was originally created. And then it also ties into some of the regulatory issues associated with Medicare Part D and CMS. To talk about the transaction itself, when RX transfer was first created by the membership of NCPDP, they envisioned it as and created it as a quote unquote pull transaction. So they modeled the transaction on what historically has been done in pharmacies, which is typically a patient would bring in a prescription bottle or even call the pharmacist and say, I've got this prescription from XYZ pharmacy. I'd like to get it at yours. Can you move it over? The pharmacist would pick up the phone. They would call that other pharmacy, and they would, in essence, pull it into their pharmacy as a transfer. So that's the only way the first version of RX transfer was designed and made available. Later on, and I think everybody involved with the work group that created this transaction and has continued to work on it, everyone recognized, well, we probably should have looked at the other possibility as well, a scenario where a pharmacy had a prescription that they were unable to fill for whatever reason, perhaps it's out of stock, and they want to transfer that to a pharmacy that does have the prescription. And that's basically oh, actually, my slide's wrong. That second one should be push. Pull versus push transactions. This is what happens when you work on slides late at night. So over the past 2 years, maybe a little bit longer, NCPDP went back to work and they created or they updated the RX transfer transaction so that it can be used either as a pull or as a push transaction. And that's really what the pharmacy industry had been waiting for. Part of what they were waiting for. The other part that they were waiting for was for the Drug Enforcement Administration to say that it's okay for you to do this, particularly with respect to unfilled prescriptions for Schedule II controlled substances. And as I think everybody is aware, last summer, the DEA did publish a rule that allows this type of transfer between pharmacies. And I think I provided some documentation that we put out as a bulletin that I think Kathy has already shared with you folks. But the fact that the original version of RX transfer did not allow for push transactions and the DEA hadn't put a stake in the ground yet, that really translated to very little interest on the part of pharmacies to adopt this transaction. The other piece of it is the enhancement that was put into place, the push part of the transaction, is part of the latest version of NCPDP script. And whether or not the industry can use the next version of NCPDP script is dictated by CMS rulemaking. About 20 years ago, I think it was, when Medicare Part D was enacted, in the law, there's a very short paragraph or two that gives CMS the responsibility for determining which e-prescribing standards will be used for the Medicare program. And due to the size of the Medicare program, that pretty much put CMS in control of which versions of NCPDP script the industry could use. And so where things stand right now, we have the industry's already, I think about 2 years ago, told CMS that the industry felt it was time to move to the next version for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is that RX transfer, the enhanced version of RX transfer was involved. And we would like CMS to move forward with rulemaking that would allow the industry to do that. We are currently waiting. We expect that CMS is going to fairly soon, in the next couple of months, tell the industry when it will allow the industry to move forward with the next version. And once that happens, we expect that's the point at which we're going to see all of the pharmacy well, I shouldn't say all, but a significant number of the pharmacy stakeholders on our network start to code for RX transfer and to start using them. We will very soon after CMS puts that stake in the ground, make sure that the version that we support the newer version of RX transfer. So we don't anticipate anybody will be waiting on us. It will be basically the pharmacy technology vendors that have to take those steps. The last thing that I got a little bit out of order. The other thing that I wanted to mention that occurs to me as a pharmacist, and we probably won't hear a lot about until the transaction starts to be used publicly or starts to be used in a big way, is that when you think about the push transaction, the situation may be late on a Friday night that the pharmacy received an electronic prescription for Adderall and they're out of it, and the patient's going away to college or the weekend. You will be able to use the push transaction to push that to another pharmacy, but practically speaking, one wouldn't want to do that unless they knew that the pharmacy to which you were going to push it actually had the drug in stock. So, and there's no electronic way of doing that now. So it's still going to be involved. There's still going to be some telephone communication that likely will have to be involved. I would certainly expect that in that situation, the pharmacist that's out of stock would pick up the phone and call and just make sure that the pharmacy to which they want to transfer that actually had it before they process the transfer. But again, we'll probably start hearing about that aspect of all this once CMS gives us the high sign and we're able to move forward with that transaction. Shifting gears again, and this is, I think, the last thing I was going to talk about before switching it over to Ben. This is something that's particularly gratifying to me as a pharmacist, especially a pharmacist who's been around as long as I have. We have quite a few pharmacists that are actually prescribing, electronic prescribing on our network these days. And it's been interesting how this has evolved over the past couple of years. I think a lot of you folks, particularly folks on the boards of pharmacy, are aware of the enhancements in terms of the scope of practice and of pharmacists that have been incorporated in statute and regulation around the country. And some of those do relate to electronic prescribing. And a couple of years ago, we were approached by some entities that were starting to roll out that type of functionality of pharmacists. At that time, we didn't support pharmacists being able to be on our network and actually electronic prescribe, but we discussed it internally, and finally, we were able, and I say we, the pharmacists on staff, were able to get leadership to understand that, well, if the state recognizes pharmacists as having prescriptive authority, then there's no logical reason why we shouldn't allow them to be listed in our prescriber directory and be able to take advantage of that and serve in that way. And so it has been the case for a couple of years now that pharmacists can, in fact, be identified in our prescriber directory as having prescriptive authority. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this particular slide, given the audience, because I think, like I just mentioned, a lot of you folks are already aware that there's a variety of authorities that have been expanded for pharmacists around the country in terms of prescribing, administering medications, being able to enter into collaborative practice agreements with providers, immunizations, that goes without saying. And so, again, I'm not going to dwell down on that. But we were curious last year, and we decided to take a look, actually more than a year ago, to determine exactly how many pharmacists on our network were actually available, or they have been recognized as having the authority, and they were listed as prescribers. And so at the end of 2022, it was just shy of 4,000. I don't yet have the number for 2023, but we certainly thought that that was a significant number. And we also looked at the number of prescriptions that they had prescribed by the end of 2022, and it was about 1.2 million. We have a research arm within the organization that looks at this kind of thing, and it's basically run by one of our pharmacists. So they were interested in finding out a little bit more. So as we looked at that, we found that the top 5 states where pharmacists were prescribing on our network were California, Washington, New Mexico, North Carolina, and Texas. And California and Washington accounted for more than half of those electronic prescriptions. I'm not sure if anybody from Oregon is on, but we don't mean to embarrass you by this, but maybe you need to see what your colleagues in California and Washington State are doing. In terms of what they are actually prescribing, as you might assume, it's the type of medications that are typically used on an ongoing basis. Number 1 was to treat diabetes mellitus. Number 2 is psychoanaleptics, which is a term I hadn't even heard before, but my colleague threw this at us. But we're basically talking about medications to treat anxiety, ADHD, depression, and the like. And then antithrombotic agents, and I think everybody's probably aware of that. We're delving even more on a case-by-case basis, reaching out to pharmacists very individually and specifically to learn more about how they're doing this and the types of practices that they're doing this in. But again, as a pharmacist, I found this to be a very gratifying development on our network. And at this point, I'm going to transition over to my colleague, Ben, and he's going to talk about how we keep the process secure.
Thanks, Ken. Yeah, if you want to go to the next one, we can start off probably before we dive into this. You brought up the Change Healthcare thing, so I can kind of talk to a little bit of that if people are seeing that out in the wild and want to know more. We don't have all the details, right? Change Healthcare is the one that's being impacted by the cybersecurity event, but we do have some details that they've taken down their systems because it was infiltrated by a bad actor group, and they want to make sure nothing is impacted before anything's brought back online. They're having third parties do the analysis for them to validate that is safe before they can turn it back on. They also they do have a decent amount of pharmacies in their network that are being impacted by this. Surescripts is doing what we can to try to alleviate some of that with converting to fax for some scripts. But with that, you can't necessarily convert to fax for controlled scripts. So that's also a problem they're running into. We're directing any questions we get generally to Change if we do not have the answer. They're still sorting everything out on their end to figure out exactly how far those bad actors got. But they are standing up a whole other infrastructure to address ongoing business on their side. So let me know if you have any questions. I can try to answer what we have. Otherwise, I'd probably have to defer that to Change, or maybe we'll have more data coming up as they share it. But so jumping into kind of what we see is some of the stuff that some of the people on this call have probably experienced or even contacted us about. Oftentimes is provider identity theft. So they'll take a compromised identity, and sometimes that's on the dark web that they're selling somebody's information, or other times, and most recently in the news, it's accounts that have been compromised from legitimate prescribers and then been phished for their information. So that's the most common way we see that occur. I'll touch on some more that we see and or have seen in the last few years in a little bit, but that's that's the way that is most commonly used to attack real prescribers and their accounts. And then we also have the question of, are cyber attacks being utilized for this? We get that question a lot. Are there issues with their identities out on the network? So when I see the identities being compromised, a lot of times it's either that someone had their identity stolen previously, or they've got their information that's been taken by one of the bad actors from, say, like a login from tech support that claims to be Microsoft and gotten into their accounts, or their information is for sale online, like their email account or something similar. And when they do a password reset or send a new token to themselves, they'll get a hold of that. They use that data to pass the identity proofing process. So depending on what vendor, and there is a question out there in the Q&A about this, but depending on what vendor there is out there, they have different attacks that they use to bypass identity proofing. And there are ways that we're looking at continually improving that to prevent that. The other thing that we also see is the DMV in Texas a few years ago was compromised. They had gotten a lot of that information. There was the compromise of the U.S. government's information for vets. There's also compromises of multiple other hospitals and their information for any of the prescribers at those locations. So they use that information to either try to pretend to be that prescriber and send scripts, or what we've seen more recently is they'll sell those identities online for some bad actor group to take over on this. And obviously that can be a ring, right? That can be a larger group that's trying to take advantage of that, has some kind of tools to quickly utilize that. We've also seen a change in the drugs. So over time, it started off with originally just controlled substances. They're sending that, that's what they want, to kind of a combination to try to hide their pattern of prescribing. And then we're also seeing them send drugs that are non-controlled with notes alongside that drug, or even a phone call in saying, oh, I actually meant to send this controlled drug. And then they'll try to get the drugs that way. Promethazine codeine's obviously been one that we've always seen in the last 2 years. And then, we're actually the oxycodone, those ones are also still concerned. That's been going on for multiple years now. But then you're seeing other ones that are easily available on the street, right? It's things they want to sell. So sometimes they'll sell the diabetic drugs. They'll sell the GLP-1 now because of the expense of that. And then we've also seen the COVID vaccines being used that way because they can not only resell those, especially outside the United States for increased prices, but oftentimes the cost is subsidized to them. So those are just some of the things we've seen go on in the past. And then we also see, the general other types of compromises for accounts. So I'll go on to that in a little bit. Ken, if you want to go to the next slide. So we kind of covered it a little bit. The main thing is provider ID is stolen. They will get access to the account. They will then attempt to send scripts. We have some tools, as well as our customers on the front end, the health technology vendors and the health systems have some tools as well to kind of prevent that, to monitor for abnormal activity, someone signing up as someone else. And then we also see sometimes there's repeat attacks on certain people's identity, because if it's been compromised once, generally the expected amount of compromise is 3 more times. So they'll keep trying to reuse these IDs. And then we also then see those prescriptions diverted or resold on the street, or we'll see quite a few that will try to send to a particular pharmacy, because that seems to be where they get those drugs picked up. So is that something involving the pharmacy? Usually we can't prove anything like that, but we do refer to law enforcement when that happens, or the pharmacy does too, if they see one of their sites that seems to be impacted. Next slide, please. All right, so I was talking about the other types of attacks. These are some of the ones that we see, and obviously I covered the identity theft. And one note on that is a lot of the ways we saw that compromise is that old identity proofing measure. So right now the DEA has a requirement for LOA 3, and LOA 3 is the NIST standard for 863-1 and 2. Those were older. They started around 2014 with a revision in 2017, and those require kind of that credit monitoring background check where it'll ask, do you have a boat? Where did you get this information? That type of thing. It'll have that type of questionnaire that everybody's probably done in the past. The problem with that is that that data is out on the web. So a lot of people share that very readily. They'll also put it in, Facebook questionnaires, things like that. And when they do that, their identities can be compromised pretty easily. Also, the way that the questionnaires work with that is they will ask those questions with usually a red herring in there or something similar. So it's a lot easier to guess some of those because they only have to get 3 to 4 correct, and then they can potentially get through that. So that's obviously been one that NIST was aware of, and they have updated their requirements to an evidence-based solution. So the evidence-based solution on the latest NIST 863-3 and now in draft 4 is around evidence that you would provide for an identity. So you'd say, okay, this person is claiming to be this individual, so you have to provide this passport, this ID, as well as some other evidence in addition. So that would be something like biometrics. So you could do fingerprinting or something similar to that if you can check it against the issuing authority. Or one of the options is to do a knowledge-based background check, but that only counts as a piece of fair evidence, which is not sufficient on its own to prove that identity. So that's some of the options there. And there's a lot of different solutions that address this. One of the ways is the identity proofing vendors have chosen kind of a hybrid approach. They'll do this facial recognition with liveliness, they call it, which is looking at facial features to guarantee that the person is actually live and doing the test as they go through the process on their mobile device or similar. So that's just one approach. There's a couple others out there on how to prove that identity. And then moving on to other things besides just the stolen identity. We've seen authentication credentials stolen. So we've seen people that work at a practice stealing someone's login. We've seen interns stealing those things, the family members, sons of some of the prescribers, things like that, where they leave their credentials and their phone for their multi-factor laying around. So they will compromise it that way. Now, the hacked one is one that you hear potentially brought up a lot, and it's one that we usually have to kind of correct when someone assumes something's been hacked. That's more of what's kind of going on with Change Healthcare. So that is harder to do. So the reason being, and we haven't seen it yet across the Surescripts network. I say yet because you never know, but we try to prevent it. One of the things about this is that would mean someone compromises the integrity of our security systems, gets onto one of the platforms and sends as through a built-in script or something similar to that. It would be a lot harder to do that without first having a login or something that they've gotten in there. So in this case, that would mean they'd have to break the encryption. They would have to get onto zero-day exploit or something like that on one of the servers. And once they did that, they would not only have to get on there, but they would have to find a way to send a script. So that would mean they would have to have very strong familiarity with how to do that. And then they would have to be able to send it through those servers without it being noticed. So we have a lot of controls on detecting if something's been sent. We have multiple checkpoints to say this came in, this was sent by X customer, this was destined for this location, and then, by the way, it's encrypted the entire way. So to do that wouldn't easily be possible on our network, along with a lot of our customers' networks. The way that they're built, they're not designed to intercept and modify the script. So it would be kind of a harder thing for them to hack into the network and send a script that way. It'd be a lot higher risk to have someone get onto the network and take down something through ransomware or something else where they just want to cause chaos or havoc, which would just take down the network rather than sending fraudulent scripts. Now, that's again with Change Healthcare. We've been monitoring all the transactions from them. We have not seen that to be the case on anything that was sent there. It's more of they went in there to try to take down the network rather than trying to send something fraudulently. If you want to go to the next slide, Ken, we can talk about a couple other weird ones. So inappropriate use. That one is really when a deceased prescriber or something else is sending when they shouldn't be. Now, is a deceased prescriber a stolen identity? Potentially. Sometimes we discover, though, in our investigation, it really was just a deceased prescriber that someone at that office tried to keep their patients up to date with the refills or something similar to that, where it was not malicious intent. No one was picking up anything fraudulently. It was really just that someone was trying to make sure that those scripts kept flowing. The same thing with the retired prescriber. We usually run into that too, where there's someone that retired and they're sending scripts in someone else's name, not realizing that they shouldn't be logging into that other person's account and rather transferring those scripts. So that would be really the two main ones we see in clinic having that problem. No longer at practice. That one really, that's not as excusable, right? So if someone leaves, the patient shouldn't be taken over without a discussion with those patients. So that's something that we usually see as inappropriate use, and we try to address that. Then you obviously have lapsed license, not authorized to prescribe, or incorrect identifiers. So when you have those type of things, that's really kind of a technical issue sometimes, or someone didn't go and renew their license. And so they'll keep trying to send, and we will deny those scripts, or the pharmacy will deny them. Basically, there's some kind of lapse in either a license or their ability to prescribe in a different state. Obviously, with the telemed rules, that's been more relaxed, but we have run into that in the past. So, Ken, if you want to go to the next slide. So obviously, we talked about a couple things. The big ones we've seen are the prescriber having their information stolen. So we talk about how to address that with obtaining a new DEA number if they can. Oftentimes that takes a long time. We want to make sure that they secure their accounts, find out how they are compromised through root cause analysis. So we work with the prescriber sometimes, the health technology vendor, or even the pharmacy to find out how that compromise occurred so we can address it. And then we also work with the pharmacies to discuss those items and work through what other prescribers might have been impacted by a certain compromise, or how exactly they sent a particular script, and figure out what's going on there, as well as how to report it. And then we work with the health technology vendors to figure out how they were able to get through the identity proofing process, or how they were able to log into a certain account. And sometimes we'll find something that's related to, one of the most common ones is they've been stealing the multi-factor by doing SIM swapping. So that's one we found out most recently. They'll go ahead and steal the SIM card for someone's phone, and they'll do that during the middle of the night when the prescriber won't be awake, so they won't know it's been stolen, and then they'll switch it back before the morning, so they won't necessarily know that someone compromised it that way. And they were able to do that up until most recently online for a lot of the phone vendors. T-Mobile and Verizon have moved away from the eSIM swap. They want you to go in to actually swap it because of fraudulent things like this. And then the other problem we've seen is even with the hard tokens, we've seen them be redirected. They were supposed to go to the prescriber's address of record, and instead someone will contact the USPS and say, oh, wrong address, we need you to ship it here. And they were able to get that moved. So then they were able to get a hold of a hard token to steal that multi-factor. So some of the things we have to address and figure out how to solve for those. And then patients. Generally, patients are usually good, but in a lot of cases, most recently, they are involved in a ring. Like they'll be part of a mule or something similar where they'll be picking up those drugs themselves, and then they'll be giving them to someone outside and basically selling it for $50 for messing with coding, something similar to that, whereas they turn around and sell it for $1,000 on the street. So that's a problem that, you know, we're obviously looking at and how to address that to see if a certain patient gets too many scripts or does doctor shopping or picks up at multiple pharmacies, different locations. That's always something that we're trying to look at. You want to do that in a way that you're not going to cause a patient safety issue. So we don't want to assume anything without a deeper investigation, but it's definitely something we're working on. All right, next slide. So some of the stuff I mentioned that we're taking steps on is we're trying to standardize across all these different platforms to understand exactly what's occurring. We're doing reporting internally to understand patterns, to understand commonalities across some of these root causes, and then figure out ways to address them. We're working on communications, and we're also trying to do things like this, outreach, to get better information out there and educate everyone, including our customers, as well as pharmacy and generally law enforcement if we can. If you contact us, we'll try to help you through anything. And then our collaboration across with pharmacies and health technology vendors in some of these cases, we had a couple of them that were bigger investigations, and we got on conference calls and figured out where all these clinics were located, who was all involved, what we wanted to put together for a package for law enforcement and get that reported out. So that's really something that we've been doing more often, and we want to do that so that there's not a bunch of separate companies and silos where everybody's doing their own investigations and somebody's not in the know. We want to make sure everybody's aware of what's going on to make sure that there is not something missed or that there's information sharing. And then we also want to do additional improvements on our quality monitoring. We have some functions internally we're working on that look at exactly the type of traffic that's going across, what we're worried about, you know, drug volume-wise, types of drugs, patterns of change for prescribers, things like that. We don't usually go into that too much. If you have more questions, let me know. That's generally, you know, kind of more of a specific thing, mostly because we don't want to share out too much of that to give ways to circumvent it. And then the questions are, can we do better ID proofing, right? Is there ways that we can improve that through, you know, things that like Ken works on trying to get a push on getting the DEA to update their requirements. Makes it easier for us to get our customers to comply on those things. Do we want to look at, you know, the future of identity proofing, right? The biometrics, you know, it's a little scary to think about, you know, kind of forcing to do facial recognition, things like that. But really it's the best way in some ways to get to the next level of remote identity proofing. Do we look at the AI functions out there, right, to detect patterns? And then just going ahead and grabbing information that we can share with everyone across the network and finding ways to do that information sharing. All right, next slide.
So Ben, I know we have a number of questions as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is just wrapping it up. So this is really just the gaps we're trying to address and all the partners we're trying to work with. If you have any suggestions or questions, if you can share them, that'd be great. So.
Okay, so I do have Marjorie. I've never actually utilized this function. Marjorie, if you just unmute yourself, I think it should work.
Hi, Carrie. This is
We can-
Marjorie. I did not raise any questions, so I do not utilize those functionality either. So I'm not sure.
Oh, okay. So you must have raised your hand, but that's
Oh,
fine. We're not
sorry.
that's all right. We're not putting you on the spot. You can go away now. No.
Thank you.
Okay. So in the question box, and I apologize, the chat box, I must have disabled it. One of the first questions is cancel is not automatic if a duplicate is sent out, correct?
That is correct. The prescriber office would have to initiate a cancel.
Okay, next question. We've had a hard time finding a company that does adequate ID proofing for prescribers resulting in imposters getting registered with Surescripts and prescribing controls. Will Surescripts remove the requirement that a third party do the ID proofing and allow us to do it ourselves?
Actually, we do not have a requirement for you to have a third party do it. We just have a requirement that you meet the NIST IL2 for identity proofing for all prescribing. So if you can create a solution that meets those requirements, we would allow it. If you want to meet on that, you can just contact me and we can figure out how to get that configured. So.
Okay, so I know the individual that asked this question, and he's super smart, and I will make sure I connect the two of you together. Next question. Do legitimate prescribers have a way to verify how many different e-prescribing accounts are open in their names or using their prescribing credentials? Can a pharmacy, quote, refuse RX if they don't wish to accept a particular prescription?
I can probably answer that, Ken. So we don't have a refuse RX, but it's they can always choose not to fill a script. So that's always in the pharmacist's hands to not fill anything. So they do not have to fill anything they receive electronically. It would be up to them.
Okay, with many states having PDMP use mandates as well as e-prescribing mandates, do you know how common e-prescribing software includes integrated PDMP access? Is the PDMP integration typically a standard feature or an additional add-on service? Well, there's a lot of questions here. How does the PDMP integration fit into the e-prescribing workflows? And are there any clinical decision support tools that prompt a user to check the PDMP when a prescription is subject to a use mandate?
Well, we really don't have direct visibility. That's something that somebody would really have to talk to the pharmacy technology vendors about, because that's the level at which that type of integration would take place.
Okay. And another question, do you know how many doctors and pharmacies have been impacted by the data breach at Change Health?
It would depend on where those doctors send their scripts. So it could essentially be all doctors if they choose to send to one of those pharmacies that's impacted by the outage. As far as pharmacies, I'm not sure we're allowed to share that data. Ken, are we able to?
Sounds
Um,
like a no.
Well, like I said, it's about 6 or 7% of on our network, to just kind of give you a rough idea of scale.
Okay. If a new SPI is created, can the RXs be paused in the background while Surescripts is confirming the new SPI is legitimate?
That's a good question. So we do that for anyone that's been impacted by ID theft, because I did mention that, obviously you'd have it repeat potentially. So if we do see someone impacted, we put them on basically a monitoring list. And if they do try to register a new SPI, we do another investigation to validate that that is a legitimate account. We confirm with the prescriber themselves if that information has been given to us, or the existing account that they've been registered with that we deemed legitimate previously. And then we would allow it only after those things are confirmed to send scripts under that SPI.
So just out of curiosity, how do you connect with the prescriber? Is it by phone or email or both? Or
Yeah, so generally when there's an original investigation around compromised identity, we'll potentially get their email provided to us or something similar where we can contact the prescriber themselves. Other times we contact the health technology vendor they're signed up through, the legitimate one that they've existed on for a long time, sending normally. And then they'll contact the provider and they have their contact information. Otherwise, if they have the information in NPES that they've put the phone number of the clinic, or even we'll call the clinic itself where they're supposed to be working to contact them to understand if that's real or not.
okay, I think that's everything in the Q&A box. Again, I apologize, the chat function. So you can take it away, Carrie.
Sure. Ken, if I could ask a question or two. do you have any idea what the CMS timeline is as far as approval of the new NCPDP script? Or I think that's a big question everybody kind of wants to know.
Yeah, we really are expecting it within the next couple of months. I mean, it's you know, it's overdue. I keep pretty close tabs with my colleague who handles federal affairs, and you know, that's what she's been telling us. It's soon.
Soon. Okay. Well, that's good. So with an RX change message, how does the pharmacy know if that message has been received by the prescriber, or how does a prescriber get a message like that? Does it ping them? Does it?
That would vary depending on the EHR, and in all likelihood, there is a queue that it would go into. Whether or not the EHR actively alerts by you know, tones or text or things like that, that would be very dependent on how the EHR would have implemented it. It's kind of really hard to say generally how it might be done.
But there is some sort of notification system there. Okay, great. Well, unless there's more questions in the chat, I think we'll finish this. It has been fantastic. Lots of information. You guys went through a lot in a super short time. So thank you for sharing your insight and expertise. I feel like our audience should have enjoyed it as much as I did. Once again, thanks to our speakers and to Kathy Keogh. This has been excellent for NASCSA membership. On behalf of the National Association of State Controlled Substance Authorities, I'd like to thank everyone who joined us today. Thank you again to the sponsors, and we wish you a wonderful and productive rest of your day. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.